The air inside the gilded leaf was thick with the scent of expensive truffle oil and the low, rhythmic hum of high society chatter. It was the kind of sound that usually signaled a successful night, but for Clara, it sounded like a ticking clock. Her feet throbbed inside her sensible black flats, sharp contrast to the polished marble floors she had been pacing for nearly 10 hours. She wasn't just tired. She was the kind of exhausted that settles into your bones and makes your hands shake just a little bit when you carry a heavy tray. Clara was 24, but tonight she felt 40. She had a daughter at home, a 3-year-old named Lily who was likely already asleep, dreaming of the park or the new crayons Clara had promised her. That promise was the only thing keeping Clara moving. Every tip she tucked into her pocket was a brick in the wall of the life she was trying to build, a life that didn't involve scrubbing stains out of linens or apologizing for things that weren't her fault. Table 12 was the problem. It had been the problem since 7 p.m. Seated, there was a man whose name was synonymous with unbreakable power. Victor Thorne didn't just walk into a room. He occupied it. He was a billionaire who had made his fortune in aggressive land acquisitions. A man who had built a career out of taking things that didn't belong to him. He sat with 3 associates, all of them younger, all of them looking at him with a mixture of fear and hungry ambition. Victor was wearing a suit that probably cost more than the car Clara drove, and he handled his wine glass as if he were holding the heart of an enemy. The trouble started with the bread. "Is this supposed to be sourdough?" Victor asked, his voice cutting through the ambient noise of the restaurant like a serrated knife. He didn't look at Clara. He looked at the bread basket as if it had personally insulted his ancestors. "Yes, sir," Clara said, keeping her voice level and professional. She had been trained to be invisible, to be a vessel for service, and nothing more. "It's baked fresh this afternoon by our pastry chef." Victor finally looked up. His eyes were cold, the color of a winter sea. "Your pastry chef should be fired. It's dense. It's insulting." "Take it away." Clara took the basket. She didn't argue. In this world, the customer wasn't just right. The customer was a god, and she was a mortal, pleading for mercy. But as the night went on, Victor's demands became more erratic. He complained about the temperature of the room. He complained about the music. He complained about the way the light reflected off his silverware. His associates laughed at his wit, emboldening him. They were drinking a bottle of Cabernet that cost $4,000, a number Clara couldn't even wrap her head around. To her, $4,000 was 6 months of rent, a year of groceries, and a chance to breathe. To Victor, it was a Tuesday night. The climax of the tension arrived when the main course was served. Clara approached the table with a heavy tray, her muscles screaming. She had practiced this movement 1,000 times. She lowered the plaita, perfectly seared wagyu steak in front of Victor. What happened next felt like slow motion. As Clara tilted the tray to retrieve the next plate, a small silver saucer of red wine reduction or sauce meant for the side slid. It was a freak occurrence, a bit of condensation on the bottom of the dish making it slick. The saucer tipped, and a few dark, crimson drops splashed onto the pristine white tablecloth, just inches away from Victor's sleeve. The table went silent. The clinking of forks in the rest of the restaurant seemed to fade away. Victor didn't move at first. He stared at the red spots on the white fabric. Then he looked at his sleeve. A tiny, almost invisible speck of sauce had landed on the cuff of his shirt. "Do you have any idea," Victor said, his voice dangerously low, "what this is?" "I am so sorry, sir," Clara said, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She immediately reached for a clean cloth from her apron. "Let me clean that right away. I'll notify the manager, and we will cover any cleaning costs." Victor barked, a harsh, jagged laugh escaping his throat. He stood up, pushing his chair back so hard it screeched against the marble. "This is a bespoke shirt. The cotton was woven in a mill that doesn't exist anymore. You can't clean this. You've ruined it, sir." "It was an accident," Clara whispered, her face flushing a deep, hot red. She could feel the eyes of every other diner on her. The humiliation was a physical weight pressing down on her shoulders. "An accident is when a child drops a ball," Victor sneered, stepping closer to her. He was much taller than her, and he used that height to intimidate. This is incompetence. This is what happens when people like you are given jobs you aren't qualified for. You're a waitress, Clary? Saw your name tag? You are a servant. Your only job is to move things from a kitchen to a table without failing. And you failed. He picked up his wine glass, which was still half full of the expensive Cabernet. You think a cloth is going to fix this? He asked. Maybe you need to see what it's like to have something ruined. The restaurant held its breath. Clara stood frozen. She expected him to call the manager. She expected to be fired. She did not expect what happened next. Victor slowly tilted his hand. He didn't spill the wine. He poured it. He poured the dark, staining liquid directly onto the center of the table, watching it soak into the expensive linen. Then he flicked the last few drops toward Clara's shoes. Clean it, Victor commanded. Sir, Clara asked, her voice trembling. You heard me. Get down on your knees and scrub the floor and this table until I can't see the mess you made. If you're going to act like a clumsy animal, I'll treat you like one. Clara looked around the room. Her manager, a man named Miller, who usually prided himself on protecting his staff, was standing by the bar, looking at his feet. He knew who Victor Thorne was. He knew Victor's company held the lease on this very building. He wasn't going to help. The tears Clara had been holding back began to sting her eyes. She felt small. She felt worthless. She felt like the 60 hours a week she worked meant nothing if a man with a checkbook could strip her of her dignity in front of a room full of strangers. I won't do that, Clara said, her voice cracking but audible. Victor's eyes narrowed. Then you'll never work in this city again. I will make sure every restaurant, every cafe, even every grocery store knows that you are a liability. I will break you, Clara. It would be so easy. He stepped even closer, his breath smelling of expensive grapes and cold malice. Now get down. Clara felt her knees weaken. She thought of Lily. She thought of the rent. She thought of how much power this man had to actually follow through on his threat. She began to lower herself, her spirit breaking, her hand reaching for the cloth she had dropped. But before her knee could touch the cold marble, a hand reached out. It wasn't a hand belonging to a waiter or the manager. It was a hand belonging to a man who had been sitting at the small, shadowy corner table nearby. He was a man nobody had noticed, someone who had been eating a simple meal and reading a notebook. That's enough, the man said. His voice wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was calm, steady, and carried a weight that seemed to anchor the entire room. Victor Thorne spun around, his face contorted in rage. Who the hell are you? The man stood up. He wasn't wearing a $5,000 suit. He was wearing a simple gray sweater and dark trousers. He looked like a high school teacher, or perhaps a local librarian. But his eyes, they held a stillness that Victor's lacked. I'm the man who's going to suggest you sit down. Apologize to this woman and pay your bill, the stranger said. Victor laughed, a sound of pure disbelief. You're joking. Do you know who I am? Do you have any idea what I could do to you and this pathetic girl? The stranger stepped out of the shadows and into the light of the chandelier. He didn't look intimidated. In fact, he looked almost bored. I know exactly who you are, Victor, the man said. But more importantly, I know who you aren't. The silence in the restaurant was no longer uncomfortable. It was heavy, like the air before a massive summer storm. Victor Thorne stood with his chest puffed out, his expensive silk tie slightly crooked from his outburst. He looked at the man in the gray sweater with a mixture of confusion and pure, unadulterated hatred. In Victor's world, people were defined by the logos they wore and the cars they drove. This man had no logos. He drove a 10-year-old sedan that was parked in the very back of the lot. To Victor, this man was a ghost, a glitch in the system that needed to be erased, who I am not. Victor repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He turned to his associates looking for a laugh, but they remained silent, their eyes darting between the two men. I am the man who owns the dirt you're standing on. I am the man who decides which buildings stay up and which ones come down. I am a titan of industry. And you. You're a nobody in a bargain bin sweater who's about to regret opening his mouth. The stranger, whose name was David, didn't flinch. He didn't even raise his voice. He walked over to Clara, who was still trembling, caught in a halfway crouch between standing and kneeling. He placed a gentle, steadying hand on her arm and guided her back to a full standing position. "You don't need to kneel for anyone, Clara," David said softly. His voice had a grounded quality to it, the kind of tone that makes people listen without being told to. Not for a steak, not for a glass of wine, certainly not for a man who thinks his bank account gives him the right to act like a monster. Clara looked at David, her eyes wide and wet with tears. She was terrified. She was thinking about her daughter, Lily, and the empty pantry at home. She was thinking about how much power Victor Thorne had to ruin her. "Sir, please," she whispered. "You don't understand. He can really do it. He can make sure I never work again." David smiled at her, and for a second, the chaos of the restaurant seemed to vanish. It was a smile of genuine kindness, something Clara hadn't seen in a very long time in this line of work. "He thinks he can," David replied. "But the world is a lot bigger than Victor Thorne's ego." Victor let out a loud, mocking snort. "This is touching, really. A hero in a thrift store outfit. Tell me, do you have a cape hidden under that sweater? Or maybe a lawsuit? Because I have a team of 30 lawyers who will eat you for breakfast before the sun comes up?" David turned back to Victor. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed, the way a teacher looks at a student who refuses to learn a simple lesson. "You keep talking about what you own, Victor, but you've forgotten the most basic rule of business. You don't insult the people who keep the world running. You're so busy looking at the ceiling that you've forgotten the foundation is what holds you up." "Enough of this philosophy crap," Victor snapped. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick wad of $100 bills, held together by a gold clip. He threw the entire stack onto the wine-stained tablecloth. There's $10,000. That's more than this girl makes in 6 months. It's more than you make in a year, probably. Take it, get out of my sight, and let her finish what I told her to do. Or stay, and I'll spend 10 times that amount, making sure you're both on the street by Monday." The diners at the nearby tables gasped. $10,000 was a life-changing amount of money for most people in the room. Some people were whispering that the man should just take the money and run. They didn't see why he was risking his neck for a waitress he didn't even know. David didn't even look at the money. He looked at the gold clip. "Nice clip," he remarked. "Is that 24 karat?" Victor smirked, thinking he had finally found the man's price. "Pure gold. Custom made. You like it? Take it. It's a tip for staying out of my business." "I think I'll pass," David said. He reached into his own pocket. He didn't pull out a wad of cash. He pulled out a small, battered black mobile phone. It wasn't the latest model. It looked like it had been dropped a few times. Victor laughed again, a jagged, ugly sound. "What are you going to do? Call the police?" "Go ahead. The chief of police and I played golf last Sunday. He's not coming for me. I'm not calling the police," David said calmly. He began to dial a number. "I'm calling a friend. A man named Arthur who handles my investments." Victor smirked, didn't falter, but one of his associates, a younger man in a sharp blue suit, suddenly looked very pale. He leaned in and whispered something into Victor's ear. Victor brushed him off, his eyes still locked on David. "Hello, Arthur," David said into the phone. The room was so quiet now that you could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. "Yes, I'm at the Leaf. Listen, I was looking over the proposal for the Northside Development Project. The one involving Thorne Acquisitions, the mention of Thorne Acquisitions." Victor's expression shifted. Only slightly, but the confidence in his eyes flickered like a dying candle. That was the name of his holding company, the one he used for his most private high-stakes deals. "Yeah," David continued, his voice casual, as if he were discussing the weather. "I've decided I don't like the leadership. It feels ... unstable. Let's pull the trigger on the short position. And Arthur, that $30 million bridge loan they were expecting for the merger tomorrow. Cancel it. Inform the board that the lead investor has lost confidence in the CEO's character." David ended the call and put the phone back in his pocket. He looked at Victor, who was now staring at him with a look of pure bewilderment. "What kind of stunt is this?" Victor demanded, though his voice lacked its previous venom. "You think you can just say some words into a phone and pretend you're a big shot? I know everyone in the investment world. I've never seen your face. That's because I don't like being seen, David said. I prefer to watch. I've been sitting here for 2 hours, Victor. I watched you treat the valet like a servant. I watched you ignore your associates when they tried to offer you advice. And I watched you try to break a woman's spirit over a drop of sauce. You're lying, Victor spat. But he was sweating now. A bead of perspiration rolled down his temple. You're a nobody. You're a fake. Check your phone, Victor, David suggested, as if on cue. Victor's phone, a gold-plated device sitting on the table, began to vibrate. It didn't stop. A notification popped up, then another, then another. The associate in the blue suit checked his own phone and let out a soft, choked sound. Sir, the associate whispered, his voice trembling. The stock. It's cratering. Someone just dumped 4% of our total shares on the open market. And the bank. The bank just sent an emergency alert. The funding for the merger has been retracted. Victor grabbed his phone, his fingers fumbling with the screen. His face went from red to a ghostly, sickly white. The Northside project was the crown jewel of his career. He had leveraged everything he owned, his houses, his cars, his reputation, to make that deal happen. Without the bridge loan, his company would be insolvent by noon the next day. He would be worse than broke. He would be in debt for the rest of his life. He looked up at David, and for the first time he saw what he had missed. He saw the way David carried himself, not with the loud, fake confidence of a bully, but with the quiet, absolute certainty of a man who moved mountains while the rest of the world slept. Who are you? Victor asked, his voice now a thin, high-pitched shadow of what it had been. I'm the foundation you forgot about, David said. The dining room was in shock. People were leaning over their tables, trying to get a glimpse of the man in the gray sweater. The manager, Miller, had finally emerged from behind the bar, looking like he wanted to disappear into the floorboards. He realized he had chosen the wrong side. David looked at Clara. She was still standing there, her hand on the back of a chair for support. She didn't understand the financial jargon, but she understood the look on Victor's face. She saw a giant falling. Victor, David said, stepping closer to the billionaire. You told Clara that her whole year's salary wouldn't cover your tie? You told her she was an animal. You told her you would make sure she never worked again. David pointed to the wine-stained tablecloth and the stack of money Victor had thrown down. I think you should pick that up, David said, and I think you should apologize. Not because your company is dying, but because it's the only way you're going to leave this room with even a shred of your humanity left. Victor looked at the money. He looked at the wine stain. He looked at the hundreds of people watching him, people he had spent his life looking down on. His breath was coming in ragged gasps. He was a man who had never lost, a man who thought he was untouchable. And in the span of 5 minutes, he had been stripped bare by a man he had called a nobody. The tension was so thick it felt like something you could touch. Everyone was waiting to see if the billionaire would swallow his pride or go down with his sinking ship. Victor stood frozen, his eyes darting between the cracked screen of his phone and the calm face of the man standing before him. The world he had built, a world made of steel, glass, and aggressive contracts, felt like it was melting away under the warm glow of the restaurant's chandeliers. His associates, the men who had been laughing and nodding at his every word just 10 minutes ago, were now backing away. They weren't looking at him with respect anymore. They were looking at him like he was a sinking ship. They were the first ones looking for a lifeboat. The younger associate in the blue suit was tapping furiously on his phone. Sir, he hissed, his voice cracking with panic. The board is calling. They're saying the news of the funding withdrawal has leaked to the press already. The shares are down another 12% in after-hours trading. If we don't fix this in the next hour, the morning opening will be a bloodbath. We'll be wiped out.
Right.
Victor didn't hear him. All he could see was David. David, the man who had been invisible. David, the man who didn't care about the gold clip or the $1,000 wine. You did this, Victor whispered, his voice shaking. You sabotaged a multi-billion-dollar merger because of a waitress and a tablecloth? No, Victor, David replied, pulling out a chair and sitting down as if he were settling in for a long talk with an old friend. You did this. You showed the world that you are a liability. A man who cannot control his temper over a drop of sauce cannot be trusted to control the future of a city. Investors don't just put money into ideas. They put money into people. And right now, no one wants to be in the Victor Thorne business. Clara watched all of this with a sense of disbelief. Her heart was still racing, but the fear was being replaced by a strange sense of awe. She had spent her whole life being told to be quiet, to work hard, and to accept that some people were just above her. She had been taught that money was power. But as she looked at David, she realized that true power didn't need to shout. It didn't need to humiliate. It just needed to be right. "What do you want?" Victor asked, his arrogance finally replaced by a desperate, hollow sound. He looked smaller now. The expensive suit seemed to hang off his frame, no longer providing the armor it once did. "You want me to apologize? Fine, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to the girl, I'm sorry for the mess. Now call your man, call Arthur. Tell him it was a mistake. Tell him the deal is back on." David looked at Clara, then back at Victor. "An apology under duress isn't an apology, Victor. It's a transaction. You're trying to buy your way out of a hole again. But some holes are too deep for money to fill." The manager of the restaurant, Miller, finally found his courage. Or perhaps he just realized which way the wind was blowing. He stepped forward, smoothing his apron. "Mr. Thorne, I think it might be best if you and your guests leave now. Your behavior tonight has been ... unacceptable." Victor turned on him, his eyes wide. You're kicking me out? I pay the lease on this building. I could have you replaced by tomorrow morning." "Actually," David interrupted, leaning back in his chair, "you don't pay the lease anymore. Not as of 3 minutes ago. My firm has been looking to diversify into local real estate. When I saw how this establishment was being run, how the management allowed its staff to be mistreated, decided to move up the acquisition. You're no longer the landlord, Victor. You're just a man who's overstayed his welcome." The room erupted into a low murmur of shock. People were pulling out their phones, recording the scene. The invincible Victor Thorne was being dismantled in real dash time. Victor looked at the stack of cash still sitting on the table. It looked pathetic now. The $10,000 that he thought could buy anyone's dignity was just a pile of paper. He reached out to grab it, but his hand was shaking so badly he knocked over his empty wine glass. It shattered on the floor, adding to the mess. "I will sue you," Victor hissed, though there was no weight behind the threat. "I will spend every penny I have left to destroy you." "You don't have every penny left," David reminded him gently. "You have an hour before your creditors start calling in your personal loans. If I were you, I'd spend that hour talking to a bankruptcy lawyer, not making threats you can't afford to keep." Victor looked around the room one last time. He saw the faces of the people he had spent his life ignoring. He saw the busboys, the other waiters, the families at the nearby tables. For the first time in his life, he wasn't looking down on them. He was looking at them from the bottom. Without another word, Victor turned and walked toward the exit. He didn't wait for his associates. He didn't look back. He walked out into the night, leaving behind his reputation, his deal, and the gold clip he loved so much. The restaurant remained quiet for a long moment after the door closed. Then, slowly, the tension began to bleed out of the room. People started talking again, but the energy had changed. It felt lighter. David stood up and turned to Clara. She was leaning against a pillar, her face pale, but her eyes bright. "Are you okay?" David asked. "I don't know," Clara admitted. "I think I'm still in shock." "Why did you do that? You didn't even know me? You risked a lot of money for someone you've never met." "I didn't risk anything," David said. "I've spent my life watching people like Victor. They think they're the main characters in the story, and everyone else is just a background actor. But the truth is, the world works because of people like you, Clara. People who show up, work hard, and keep their integrity even when things are difficult. People like Victor are just noise. You're the signal." David reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple business card. It wasn't gold embossed or fancy. It just had a name and a phone number. "I run a foundation," David explained. We focus on providing education and career placement for people who have the drive but haven't had the opportunity. I've been looking for a guest relations director, someone who knows how to handle people with grace, even when they don't deserve it. Someone who understands the value of service, but knows they aren't a servant. Clara looked at the card. You're offering me a job? Just like that? Not just like that, David said. I've been watching you all night. I saw how you handled the rude table in the corner. I saw how you helped the elderly couple with the menu. And I saw how you stood your ground when that man tried to humiliate you. You have something that can't be taught, Clara. You have character. Miller, the manager, scurried over, looking desperate to fix his image. Clara, of course, you don't have to listen to him. Your job here is safe. In fact, I was just thinking about giving you a promotion to floor lead. Clara looked at Miller. She thought about all the times he had asked her to work on her day off. She thought about how he had stood by and watched while Victor Thorne tried to make her kneel on the floor. No thank you, Mr. Miller, Clara said, her voice firmer than she ever thought possible. I think I've spent enough time in this building. She turned back to David. When do I start? Whenever you're ready, David smiled. But first, I think you should go home. There's someone waiting for you, right? Clara thought of Lily. She thought of the crayons and the park. For the first time in months, the weight on her chest was gone. She felt like she could breathe. She felt like the future wasn't just a mountain she had to climb, but a path she was allowed to walk. As Clara went to the back to get her things, David sat back down at his small table. He picked up his notebook and began to write. He wasn't a billionaire in the way Victor was. He didn't care about being a titan. He just cared about the foundation, the one that held everything up. Outside, the city lights flickered and the sound of traffic continued. The world hadn't stopped spinning, but for one waitress and one billionaire, everything had changed. One had learned that money is a fragile shield, and the other had learned that her dignity was a prize no one could take away unless she let them. 6 months had passed since that rainy Tuesday night at the restaurant, and the world felt entirely different for Clara. The seasons had changed, and with them, the very fabric of her daily life. She no longer woke up with the heavy, sinking feeling of dread that comes from knowing you have to stand on your feet for 12 hours while being treated like an object. Instead, she woke up to the soft light of the sun hitting her new apartmenta, modest but beautiful place with big windows and a small room just for her daughter. Lily Clara stood in her kitchen, stirring a pot of oatmeal. She wasn't rushing. That was the biggest change of the time. In her old life, every second was an emergency. She was always running behind, always trying to catch a bus, always trying to find a sitter, always trying to make ends meet. Now, she had a schedule that allowed her to be a mother. She worked as a director for the Sterling Foundation, the organization David had told her about. Her job was to find people just like her, people with talent and heart who were stuck in dead-end situations, and give them the tools to rise. She looked down at her hands. They weren't cracked from harsh dish soap or stained by wine reduction anymore. They were steady. The phone on the counter buzzed. It was a message from David. He was checking in on the preparations for the annual charity gala. Unlike Victor, who viewed charity as a way to get a tax break, David viewed it as a responsibility. He treated Clara as a peer, often asking for her perspective because she knew what it was like to be on the other side of the velvet rope. He valued her street-level wisdom more than any Ivy League degree. While Clara's life had been on an upward trajectory, the news about Victor Thorne had been a steady stream of disasters. The Thorne empire hadn't just cracked, it had disintegrated. After the merger collapsed, the banks had moved in like sharks. His properties were seized, his yachts were auctioned off. His name became a cautionary tale in business schools about the cost of a bad reputation. The man who once thought he owned the city was now living in a small, rented condo on the outskirts. Fighting off lawsuits and avoiding the very people he used to call friends, Clara arrived at the office an hour later. The Sterling Foundation was housed in a renovated warehouse, open, airy, and full of plants. It didn't feel like a cold corporate headquarters. It felt like a place where things grew. As she walked to her desk, she saw a man sitting in the reception area. He was hunched over, his head in his hands. He was wearing a suit that was clearly expensive, but was now wrinkled and slightly too big for him, as if he had lost weight from stress. Clara froze. She recognized the back of that head. She recognized the way he tapped his foot in nervous, entitled rhythm she had heard once before under much darker circumstances. It was Victor. He didn't see her at first. He was staring at a flickering monitor on the wall that displayed the Foundation's mission statement, Dignity for All. Clara took a deep breath. Her first instinct was to turn around and walk away. She felt that old spark of fear in her stomach. The ghost of the girl who had almost knelt on a marble floor to scrub a wine stain. But then she remembered David's words. She remembered that she was the signal, not the noise. She walked toward him. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her voice calm and professional. Victor looked up. It took a moment for his eyes to register who she was. When they did, his face went through a painful series of expressions: shock, embarrassment, and then a deep, crushing shame. He looked older. The sharp, predatory edge of his face had softened into something haggard and tired. "Clara," he whispered. He didn't call her waitress. He didn't call her girl. "Mr. Thorne," she replied, acknowledging him but not offering a smile. "Do you have an appointment with the director?" Victor looked down at his shoes. They were scuffed. "I don't. I came here hoping to speak with David, or you. Mostly you, I suppose." "Why?" "I've lost everything," he said, and for the first time he sounded honest. There was no performance, no ego. The lawsuits. They took the last of it. "I can't even get a job as a consultant. My name is poison. I spent 30 years building a wall of money around myself, and I realized too late that I built it on sand." He looked around the beautiful, bustling office. "I saw the news about what you're doing here. How you're helping people start over. I know it's a long shot. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm desperate. I need a way back. Not to the top dash, just ... a way to be a person again." Clara looked at him and didn't feel the anger she expected. She didn't feel the urge to mock him or tell him to get out. She felt a strange sense of pity. This man had been so obsessed with power that he had never learned how to be a human being. Now that the power was gone, he was empty. "You told me that night that I was an animal," Clara said softly. "You told me you would break me. I was the one who was broken," Victor said, his voice barely audible. "I thought if I made other people feel small, it would make me feel big. I was wrong. I've spent the last 6 months alone. None of the people I gave money to would take my calls. None of the people I helped remembered my name once the checks stopped clearing." Just then, David walked out of his inner office. He stopped when he saw Victor. His expression didn't change. He didn't look angry. He looked observant. He walked over and stood next to Clara, placing a hand on the back of her chair. "Victor," David said. "You're a long way from the bistro." "I am," Victor said, standing up. He looked like he wanted to shake David's hand but thought better of it. "I was just telling Clara. I'm looking for work. Anything. I know the industry. I know how the systems work. I could help with the logistical side of your housing projects. I'll work for a fraction of what a junior clerk makes. I just need a chance to prove I'm not the man I was that night." David looked at Clara. He wasn't going to make this decision. He was giving the power to her. It was the ultimate gesture of respect. Clara looked at Victor. She thought about the restaurant. She thought about the wine stain. She thought about how much she had hated him in that moment. But she also thought about the Foundation's mission. If they only helped people who were already good, they weren't really changing the world. They were just rewarding people who were already on the right path. True change happened when you reached into the dark and pulled someone toward the light. "We have a project in the East End," Clara said. "It's a community center. It needs a lot of oversight permits, contractor management, budgeting. It's hard work. You'll be working in a trailer, not a corner office. You'll report to me. Every Friday, you'll present your progress. And if I hear even a whisper of you treating a single laborer or staff member with anything less than total respect, you're gone. No second chances. No phone calls to Arthur. No excuses." Victor's eyes filled with tears. He nodded quickly, almost frantically. "I'll do it. I'll be there. Thank you." "Thank you, Clara." As Victor walked out of the office, his shoulders slightly less hunched than before, David turned to Clara. "You're a better person than I am," David said with a quiet smile. "I might have let him sit there all day." "I didn't do it for him," Clara said, turning back to her computer. "I did it because if I turned him away when he was down, I'd be exactly like the person he was when he was up. And I've worked too hard to be anything like Victor Thorne." David nodded, looking at her with genuine pride. "The East End project is lucky to have you. And so am I." Clara smiled. She felt a sense of closure that no amount of money could provide. She had one. Not by making him lose, but by showing him what it actually meant to be powerful. The East End Community Center project was more than just a construction site. It was a symbol. For the people who lived in the surrounding neighborhood, it was a promise that they hadn't been forgotten. For Clara, it was the proudest achievement of her professional life. And for Victor, it was the place where he finally learned how to be a man. The project had taken nearly a year to complete. There were days when the rain turned the site into a swamp of thick gray mud. There were weeks when the supply chain broke down and the steel didn't arrive on time. Through it all, Clara was there, wearing a hard hat and carrying a clipboard, making decisions that affected hundreds of lives. And right behind her, usually carrying a stack of blueprints or a box of coffee for the crew, was Victor. He had kept his word. He showed up at 6 a.m. every morning, often before the sun had even cleared the horizon. He didn't sit in the air-conditioned trailer. He was out on the dirt talking to the electricians, the plumbers, and the masons. He didn't talk to them about leveraged buyouts or profit margins. He talked to them about their families. He asked them about their kids. He learned their names. One afternoon, a few weeks before the grand opening, Clara found Victor sitting on a stack of lumber, sharing his lunch with an older carpenter. They were laughing about something. Victor looked different. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by rugged work pants and a flannel shirt. His skin was tanned from the sun, and the hollow, haunted look in his eyes had been replaced by a quiet focus. When he saw Clara, he stood up immediately. He didn't stand up out of fear anymore. He stood up out of genuine respect. "The plumbing on the second floor is finished," Victor reported, wiping sweat from his forehead. "The inspector is coming at 4. We're ahead of schedule." "Good work, Victor," Clara said. She looked at the man he had become. It was hard to believe this was the same person who had tried to make her kneel in a restaurant. "You've done a lot for this neighborhood. The people here, they know you. They like you." Victor looked at the half-finished building. "I spent my whole life building things for myself, Clara. I built towers that people couldn't afford to live in. I built offices where people were afraid to speak their minds. This is the first time I've built something that actually matters. It's the first time I can sleep at night without feeling like I'm waiting for a knife in the back." The day of the grand opening arrived. It was a bright, crisp morning. A crowd had gathered in front of the center families. Local business owners and children who were excited about the new library and basketball court. David was there, standing in the back of the crowd, watching with a satisfied look on his face. He didn't want to be on the stage. He wanted the spotlight to stay on the people who had done the work. Clara stood at the microphone. She looked out at the faces of the community. She saw Lily, her daughter, sitting in the front row, waving a small flag. She saw the workers who had poured their sweat into the foundation. And she saw Victor, standing off to the side, clapping quietly. "This center belongs to you," Clara told the crowd. "It was built by people who believe that everyone deserves a place to grow, a place to learn, and a place to be treated with dignity. We've learned that the strongest structures aren't made of steel and concrete. They are made of the way we treat each other when no one is looking." After the ribbon was cut and the doors were opened, the celebration began. There was music, food, and laughter. In the middle of the chaos, Clara felt a tap on her shoulder. It was Victor. "I have something for you," he said. He handed her a small velvet box. Clara opened it. Inside was the gold clip he had thrown onto the table that night at the restaurant. It had been cleaned and polished. "I managed to get it back from the liquidators a few months ago," Victor explained. "I wanted to give it to you. Not as a tip. Not as a way to show off. But as a reminder, that clip represents the man I used to be, someone who thought he could buy anything. I want you to have it, or sell it, or melt it down. It doesn't have any power over me anymore. Clara looked at the gold, then back at Victor. I don't want to melt it down, she said. I think we should put it in the display case in the lobby. We'll put a little plaque under it that says, "True value cannot be measured in gold."
Oh.
Victor smiled, a real warm smile. I'd like that. As the sun began to set, David walked over to them. The board is very impressed, Clara. They want you to head up the national expansion. We're going to build 10 more of these across the country. Clara's heart soared. I'd love to, but I'm going to need a good team. She looked at Victor. Are you ready to travel? Victor nodded. Wherever you need me, boss. Before they left for the night, David made a suggestion. I think we should go to dinner. To celebrate. My treat. Anywhere but the Gilded Leaf, Clara joked. Actually, David said, a mischievous glint in his eye. I think we should go exactly there. They arrived at the restaurant an hour later. It looked the same marble floors, the same crystal chandeliers, the same hushed atmosphere of wealth. But as they walked in, the manager, Miller, froze. He recognized them instantly. He looked at Clara in her professional suit, David in his simple sweater, and Victor in his humble clothes. A table for 3. Please, David said. Miller scrambled to find them the best seat in the house, table 12. As they sat down, the restaurant fell silent. People whispered, recognizing the fallen billionaire and the heroic waitress. But Clara didn't care about the whispers. She looked at the white tablecloth. She looked at the silverware. A young waiter, looking nervous and tired, approached their table. He was carrying a tray of water, and as he reached for a glass, his hand shook. A small splash of water landed on the table near David's sleeve. The young man's face went white. Oh, I'm so sorry, sir. Please let me get that. I'm so sorry. He looked like he expected to be screamed at. He looked like he expected his night to be ruined. David smiled at him. It's just water, son. Don't worry about it. Victor reached out and patted the waiter's arm. Accidents happen. You're doing a great job. Take your time. Clara looked at the waiter and saw her younger self. She reached into her bag, pulled out a pen, and wrote a note on a napkin. She handed it to him. That's the number for the Sterling Foundation, she whispered. If you ever feel like you're meant for more than carrying trays, give us a call. We're always looking for people with heart. The waiter took the note, his eyes filling with hope. He thanked them and walked away, his head held a little higher. The 3 of them sat there, sharing a meal and talking about the future. They weren't a billionaire, a waitress, and a mystery man anymore. They were 3 people who had been changed by a single moment of conflict and a long journey of redemption. Victor looked at the spot where the wine stain had been all those months ago. You know, he said softly, that was the best thing that ever happened to me. Losing everything was the only way I could find anything worth having. Clara raised her glass. To the foundations, she said. To the foundations, David and Victor repeated in unison. Outside, the city continued its busy, noisy life. But inside that small circle of light at table 12, there was peace. The story that had started with a public humiliation had ended with a private victory, a victory of character over cash, of kindness over cruelty, and of the human spirit over the walls we build to protect ourselves. Clara walked out of the restaurant that night, not looking back. Because for the first time in her life, everything she wanted was right in front of her.